Hello, everybody, and welcome again to another episode of the Risk Matrix with myself, Dr. Martin, and James Junkin. Hi, James.
Hey, roll tide. Hey, you remember that 1970 show, Welcome Back, Kotter?
That's right.
That'd be cool
It's the time.
intro song for us, like, "Welcome back."
Exactly. Exactly.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I think people were looking for us to be welcomed back into their minds when we went off and took our little break there for a while. But we're back. We're back, baby, and we got a lot of new stuff planned coming up in the next several months. We're going to get a LinkedIn page. What else, James?
Getting a LinkedIn page, we're expanding across social media. Um, there'll be a lot of other ways to interact with us, in the podcast, so you can still find us on Spotify, Bear Force's YouTube channel, Apple Podcast, etcetera. I think there's another, podcast hosting site, that, they told me what it is. I can't remember. Our amazing new producer, Amanda, will
Yeah.
have to shoot me a message and let me know what the name of that podcast hosting site is. But a lot of ways to talk to us, a lot of ways to interact. We do this for you. So be sure to reach out. Let us know about, episodes you'd like us to talk about. Neither one of us are shy about controversy. So if you've got something that's heavily debated at your company or in your safety friends that you hang around, we'll get in here and we'll talk about it. Sometimes me and Dr. Martin agree, sometimes we don't
Sweet one.
agree. Now, our producer says it's found on Amazon Music and Substack. So we on Substack, baby. Substack. It's great. Roll
All
Tide.
right. Well, today we got a controversial topic, and I'm not going to bring it up until we rip something from the headlines. James, this past week there was a steel mill in Pennsylvania had an explosion. One worker was killed, and the last I heard, they were digging people out of the rubble. Have you heard anything else about that explosion?
I really haven't stayed up to date like I should on that. I'm familiar with that plant. We did some site safety a few years ago in that plant. A lot of great workers from various contractor companies work in that plant alongside uh, employees. It's one of those high hazard, high risk type situations. Our thoughts and prayers are out with the families of those that are killed and injured, and all their coworkers and friends that are worked there. I'm sure there'll be an extensive investigation to get to the bottom of what the causal factors were. Um, but anytime you have an incident like that, there's also going to be a call for accountability.
Yep. And so that's a good segue there, James. We're going to talk about accountability today, and specifically blame versus no blame. And we had a little conversation offline before this began, and we've got a few things that I think you're going to find interesting when it comes to blame or no blame. I know that a lot of people these days like that no blame culture, right? And for various reasons, if you don't blame people and you use it as a learning opportunity, you can find out a lot more and make improvements to the system. But I think you and I can both agree that sometimes there has to be blame.
Well, there is this, and I've said it. Let me back up. If you're a safety professional and your theory, your attitude, your philosophy has not evolved over your career and you've never changed your mind anything and on anything, you've been practicing for 20 years, something's wrong. Okay? You're
Agreed.
not challenging yourself. So I can remember the early days of my safety career following in the footsteps of others. Perhaps you've said this too, Dr. Martin. Blame is the enemy of understanding when we talk about incident investigations. And if our incident investigations are always about who we're going to blame, then people are hesitant to be truthful with us.
Or if we're gonna blame people, it always was blame, shame, and retrain,
Refrain, right?
right?
But I've seen a lot of that, and I still see a lot of that today, and I'm against all of that. But I hate it when you say this. I hate when you say this, but I'm gonna say it. You know what I'm about to say?
It just depends.
Just depends. It's hard to have absolutes because the world is not absolute. The world is not always black and white. There are gray areas. And, I've evolved some of my thinking to adopt a lot of what you see today in human performance. Dr. Reason's famous quote that the worker's actions tend to be the final garnish to a lethal brew that's been long in the cooking, right?
Right.
Uh, so, as we talk about these concepts, I think the reality is somewhere in the middle of the two extremes, right? Where you have, we're not going to blame the worker for anything, to where we've going into the past where we blame the worker for everything, and vice versa. The first extreme was the worker is to blame for everything, blame, train, and reshame, to nowadays, no accountability. The worker wasn't to blame at all. And somewhere in the middle, there's probably some accountability that needs to be held. And certainly when you have incidents that result in serious injury or fatality, regardless of what people's safety philosophy is, there is a legal system that will hold people accountable, either civilly or criminally. We just saw in the Aghorn incident, H2S incident, claimed the life of an employee and his wife, and by the grace of God, not two children that were buckled in the seat of her vehicle, right? People were held accountable for that. And so sometimes rightfully so. So I think it's a balance. But let's talk about this no blame culture, and while at the same time holding people accountable and understanding that there is an OSHA defense for unpreventable employee misconduct.
And that's a segue I was gonna kinda put in there, James, is that you and I both do a lot of, OSHA investigations, or we're involved in a lot of the post, citation, uh, investigations, and then, presentations to OSHA on what went wrong, or why something hasn't been done, and many times, we come up with unpreventable employee misconduct. Like, there are times when you have to hold somebody accountable for doing something because they just didn't care, or you did your best and they still did whatever they were gonna do.
So I think what the evolution is, accountability does not need to end with the frontline worker. Okay. When we're looking at an investigation, I hate the term root cause, because it's never a single cause, ever. It's never a single cause. It may be a single action, as in what Dr. Reason said, the final garnish to a lethal brew that's been long in the cooking. But there are always multiple causal factors, right?
Right.
And so when you see a worker getting hurt or a worker getting killed or an environmental disaster, there are other things that lead up to those events where people can also be held accountable. And we need to move away from this. Well, the worker didn't follow the process procedure. And so we're going to retrain the worker, and then the worker is going to feel really bad about what they did. It's never going to happen again, without looking at the systematic issues that are involved, right? But I will say this, in the reality of doing these OSHA inspections, defending companies against um, in OSHA investigations, inspections, etc., you know, I really don't have a moral dilemma. I don't think of myself as like a criminal defense lawyer, right? Where I know my client's guilty, but I still put on a good defense, and not no banging, no judgment there on criminal defense lawyers. Maybe that's a bad example. They still have the right to a defense under the law, right? But the way I approach these investigations is in areas in which companies have violated an OSHA standard, either by omission or commission. We admit to that, and we put abatement in place so it never happens again. Because my goal is what OSHA's goal is. I want workers to come home safe from a high hazard job. That's what your goal is, right?
That's
So
exactly
we
what it
have the
is.
same goal. But OSHA is not all knowing all the time, and sometimes there's different agendas, and sometimes they're just wrong, right? They're just wrong on either the standard or the facts. So in that case, you do get you get a defense, but that doesn't mean that everybody acted perfectly or that there shouldn't be accountability. And in those type of investigations, and all of us do these investigations, whether OSHA is involved or not, we begin with the premise of trying to figure out what went wrong so it doesn't happen again. And usually my
Right.
experience is multi-layered. So has that been your experience?
Yes, yes. Usually things have, multiple causation, for whatever happens, right? And a lot of times, there will be a worker component or a management component or a human component. And in fact, if the human's involved, there's always a human component, to whatever happens. And I guess, where I think a lot of people fall apart is they're so intent on not, and I say blame, not blaming the worker, right? Not holding the worker accountable for their actions, that, we tend not to include that in our final, assessment of a situation, right? Because we're so afraid that the worker or management or whatever human factor might be the root cause, the primary root cause.
Well, the reality is, despite our best efforts of policies, of training, of job site inspections of things, sometimes people are going to do what they want to do regardless. And anybody that's worked field safety any length of time understands you can coach people, you can train people, you can beg people, and sometimes people are just not going to care. And I think the delineation between the no blame culture, which a lot of people are advocates of, right, and the accountability culture that you saw years ago in the beginning of behavior based safety is really trying to understand that despite some of our best efforts, there are differences between omission and commission. There's a difference between I didn't know, I forgot, human error was designed into the process and I made a mistake and somebody got hurt or I didn't,
Right.
and then I don't care. There's not a safety management system out there for I don't care. I knew what the
Well
rule was and I did something different. So I
well,
think
let me just add in one other situation, because I think that there is a component of worker behavior where, you train, you tell, you beg, you plead, you do all those things, and they may not care, um, but there are situations where we put our workers in where they don't have the capacity to do the job or the task in the way that it's intended to be done, and then the blame falls on management for putting them in that situation where they're bound to fail.
even in unpreventable employee misconduct defenses, I have often found other causal factors. And in every serious injury and fatality or serious and property damage incident, bad management decisions were part of it. You look at the entire structure of a safety management system, right? So I'm not against accountability, but if we're going to hold people accountable, let's hold everybody accountable. And I think when we're talking about unpreventable employee misconduct defense, that's an element to defend a company against OSHA citations. That doesn't mean that the company did not have areas of improvement within the safety management system, right?
Correct.
So,
Correct.
I'll give you an example. OSHA can only cite you for violations of a standard, but there are a lot of things that are industry best practices that could improve uh, the work environment and lessen risk, right? So, we had an incident a few years ago where a worker drove a forklift into an energized power line and subsequently died. And there was a lot of different factors that went on in that, but we were successful in defending the company because we were able to exert an unpreventable employee misconduct defense. But that did not mean that we didn't find areas that we could improve, right? We just hadn't violated the law. So one of the things that we found is when we were doing our laydown areas and beginning of the job site, we put the porta potties near and under a power line, which were well above the porta potties, right? Uh, and we shouldn't have been driving telehandling equipment over there. We should have been way away from that. The employee violated all of our rules. But in the future, guess where we're not putting porta potties? They're not going under
Underneath the power
power
lines.
line. Not going under power lines. So that's an effort of holding people accountable still, for the design of the work site while still exerting unpreventable employee misconduct. So a lot of talk in conferences about no blame cultures, a lot of talk, writings about no blame cultures, and I agree to that to some extent, but I think really what we should return that to an attitude not to focus entirely upon the worker. Let's look at accountability all throughout the organization, including myself. You know, I've taken ownership of incidents where I didn't properly anticipate hazards or put in proper controls. I thought we had it.
Mhm.
We didn't. I have to take accountability for losing one of my top safety professionals because I didn't fully appreciate mental health in my team. I was focused on the mental health of somebody else's team, didn't even take care of the people that are dearest to me, right? I got to own that. I got to live with that. So
Right.
that goes back to what I said earlier. If you hadn't changed your philosophy in 20 years, something's wrong.
Well, if you don't have a mixed philosophy, okay, so I see a lot of people, they grab on to whatever's new and trendy and all that kind of stuff, and things like zero and no blame, and I mean they're really great to hear, but really in to put these into practice is a very hard thing. Well, let's talk a little bit about behavior-based safety, right? That's accountability, right? If it's behavior-based safety is done right and assessment-based safety is done right, there will be accountability without the onus of blame. Would you agree with that?
I would. I would. I don't think behavior-based safety went far enough. You know, it was primarily focused on the actions of the worker without really, at least in the initial stages. If you talk to Geller today, he's a system safety guy too, right? With all respect to Scott Geller, I think he's evolved a little bit over the years. And behavior-based safety has evolved a little bit. Um, I think moving beyond just, hey, I'm looking out for you, you're looking out for me, we're our brothers and sisters keeper, you know, into looking at controlling hazards in the design phase of the work is a natural evolution of behavior-based safety. We ought to design out the potential for human error in the things that we do and anticipate that people can make mistakes. However, how do I say this without being offensive? All
Just
right,
say it.
I'm bridging the gap here between academia and research and theory and reality. A lot of times we get in our heads in the books, in the theories, in the discussions, in the podcast, in the papers we read, and I'm not against any of that, man. I'm I'm I teach, you teach, you've got a PhD, and one of these days I'm gonna graduate, maybe, right? So we enjoy the theory, the literature, and et cetera, but we can get in our own heads and forget what it's like to be out there in the field where, you're still going out every day and you're trying to motivate people to do the right thing. And sometimes there are people that just don't care.
They either
And
don't care or their priorities have been so skewed over time that it goes in one ear and out the other because their priority is production, priority is cost, priority is getting through the day, priority is leave me alone. Who knows what their priority is, but they've been so worn down by the conditions, right? That maybe it comes off as they just don't care, but it's just they have other
it
priorities.
could be, it could be. And it's back to that, it just depends, right? It just depends. I've been in situations where the safety management system, the organizational culture is awful, okay? I've also been in safety management systems where every budget item we wanted, we got. Every request we made to management, we had. But when you get in the field and safety's walking around, they got code for it. 99, 99, 99's here, so they're alerting people. So they're afraid of the safety people and they don't want you to come around. And you know what I'm talking about. Why you eyeballing me, man? Why you eyeballing me? Right? Need you watching me work, dude. Go do something else. So the reality is it's a blend of all these type situations. And I think you have to balance no blame with accountability, and how about I coined something new? Fair, fair.
Wait,
Let's be
wait,
fair.
wait, wait, is this the guy that says fair fair is where the pig goes to get a ribbon?
No, I didn't wanna call it just, but fair is where a pig goes to get a ribbon. That's exactly
I
right.
feel like
Right is not fair.
just is what the community is using, right? Just, but it is the concept of fair, right? But it's a balance. It's a very delicate balance being fair or being just.
So, I will also say this, I would not want to encourage any company not to exert an unpreventable employee misconduct defense against an OSHA citation in order to adhere to the concept of just culture. Okay. So let me walk through what an unpreventable employee misconduct defense is. Doesn't mean that you couldn't approve. It doesn't mean there wasn't areas within your safety management system that were deficient. This is you putting forth a defense to say we should not be cited by OSHA as an organization for a violation of the OSHA Act, okay? And I see companies trying to exert these defenses, but they don't have all the elements. If you have all the elements of an unpreventable employee misconduct defense, then you have a mature safety management system, right? So the first one is you must have an established rule. So that's your policies, okay?
Mhm.
That rule, if it had been followed, this incident would not have happened or the violation would not have occurred. And typically these are related to incidents, right? The worker would not have fallen, the worker would not have been struck by, et cetera, et cetera. All right. Number two, the rule has to be adequately communicated to the employee. That's your training. So when we've been successful with this, we have a policy. That's why you have written policies and procedures that are very detailed of what your safety rules are. Then you have documentation on how you've communicated that to them. Now, that comes in the form when I like to use this defense. Hey, here's our training, and not just a roster, but here are the slides that we used. Here's the video that we have. Here is the test the employee took that said, this is the answer to the question, right?
And you
For as
know what's
far as
better, James? If you have more than one instance of training, right? Have you brought
absolutely,
it up in a safety topic? Has the employee, stated that they read the policy? Have they been retrained for things? The more is better to
absolutely.
do.
So, most people have an induction safety orientation type training, and they talk about this at the surface level. That's one level of training. Safety meetings in which you cover these topics, in which you've got whoever's involved in this incident having had attended those safety meetings. Follow-up competency trainings, toolbox talks. The more documentation you have, the more you're able to prove that it was, quote, adequately communicated. Remember, it's not just it was communicated, it was adequately communicated. Now, I see this a lot in assessments we do. OSHA doesn't consider the fact that you have like a handbook or here's our rules, here's a policy you need to read and sign as adequately communicated. Everything else that we talked about is additional communication. right? Um, the third element, you have taken steps to discover violations of not only this this rule, but all your rules.
A disciplinary policy.
So, well, let's set that one aside just for a second. So in my mind, the steps to discover violation, that is your job site inspections. And OSHA kind of looks poorly on these things that never find any areas for improvement. So when you go out and you do job site inspections, you need to document it. That means we went out, employees weren't wearing PPE or they weren't tied off or they had not, you know, soil piles were too close to the excavation, whatever it is, right? We have documentation that we found violations and we corrected it, right? Somebody has to do that. Now, typically that falls to the safety professionals, but that could be anybody in your organization. That could be supervisors, that could be top management. And the more people that are involved in that, and the more documentation you have,
Mhm.
the more that it seems that you're out there trying to enforce your safety policies and procedures, and they don't just live in isolation in some third party verification system that nobody's ever looked at since you got your score, right? Somebody's
Right.
actually going out and checking on this stuff. And then you get into the last part, and we like to use this term all the time, progressive disciplinary policy. Now, OSHA doesn't use that term, but talk for a minute about what you think about progressive disciplinary policies. What's that about?
So that comes from human resources, right? In the last probably 10, 15, 20 years. Progressive disciplinary policy is it, as the actions happen, right? You start with verbal to written to suspension and then ultimately maybe termination, right? But you show a progression of documenting behaviors or actions that are adverse and putting them into whatever format you're going to do to document it. So if you give a verbal warning, it should go in the daily log. If you give a written warning, there should be a form that somebody fills out and shares that with the employee. And there should be what the expectations are for improvement, right? And then so on from there.
This is where I find most companies are lax. Okay. Safety discipline can be, if you want to go back to some of the elements of behavior based safety, what it's built on is I see you violating a rule, Dr. Martin, you don't have on your hard hat. And I remind you, hey, doc, put on your hard hat. And you do it. That is a form of discipline. Sometimes that discipline takes place when with safety professionals or project managers or superintendents or whatever, and it's usually handled verbally and mostly it's corrected because nobody's got time to do all this documentation. And that start off when you start writing people up, et cetera, that gets back into that blame and the man, it kind of destroys our relationship. So there needs to be some means though of you documenting it if you're ever going to exert this defense,
I was going to say if you don't document it, it didn't happen.
right? If you do not document it, you cannot exert an unpreventable employee misconduct defense. You can have a rule, you can have training, you can have hazard inspections and job site inspections and all that, but if you don't have documentation of an implemented disciplinary program, it didn't happen, right? And
Right.
so that's where most of these defenses fail. So more documentation, and I've used this, I don't know what examples you might be able to throw out there, but even something as simple as job site inspections that note employees were not wearing PPE, told them to put on PPE, right? I've
Right.
got something I can hang my hat on because the other side of this, with the progressive discipline, verbal warnings, written warnings, leaving days off, I see it in paper. I don't see a lot of people using it.
Right. Right.
And but things like failed drug test and termination for that, terminating people for, um, unsafe driving behaviors or putting something in their file. You don't have to have tons and tons and tons of documentation, but you need documentation to prove to OSHA that you are serious about enforcing your safety rules and there's accountability when workers don't, right?
That's correct. Yep.
So, how does that square with the no blame culture?
Well, again, I mean, we're using the word accountability, right? Accountability, but really what it is, the base word for that is blame, right? That there has to be whatever percentage you put on the worker, there has to be some worker involvement in the system, and it's just a matter of how much, right? And the fact of the unpreventable employee misconduct offense, I would say that there is blame or accountability being put on that worker, and I think a lot of people would have a hard time with that. I think a lot of
Mhm.
our counterparts um, would have a very hard time working some of the cases that you and I work and asserting that because it goes against a hard fought belief that we never ever 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 place blame.
And I think this is, again, it just depends, but that's the disconnect between office safety and field safety, right?
Yep.
A lot of these in being absolute in black and white in all these areas, right? In theory, we don't want to blame people for safety violations of omission. I forgot,
Right.
right? Okay. But that doesn't mean that that worker shouldn't be held accountable. At some point, you hold people accountable. You don't have to fire everybody for
Right.
making mistakes. You have to look at the system and say, am I designing the potential for mistakes in it? Well, it's easy to make mistakes, right? And you shouldn't blame workers for mistakes that are imparted by the system. But in many of these cases, if you talk to the people who still put on steel toe boots and go to work every day, they'll tell you they're problem children out there. They're people that we talk to every day about the same
Nobody
thing
wants to work with them.
over and over again. You know, please talk, please talk, please talk, please talk. And we're not children. We're adults coming to do a job and to go home and take care of our families. And
And
nobody
neither
comes to work to get killed, but there are some personality types and some people that gravitate to, I don't like being told what to do. I'm gonna do it my way. Do you disagree with that?
I do not disagree with that. I just want to say, James, that in this conversation you said it depends. I know it. I
I hate
know it.
that.
It's like sticking a thorn in your side.
But you didn't hear
Um,
me say go Tigers, and I ain't saying that. All right.
It depends is probably 5 times, but, love this conversation. I think we've pretty much carried it to its, logical end here, but what I'd like to see if anybody wants to, fight this battle with us, uh, you can go to our LinkedIn or to the Veriforce, YouTube page and type in your comments. What do you think? Is blame the same as accountability? Is accountability the same as blame? Is there room for, um some piece of blame to the worker in a system? Or are we going to hold fast to creating one ideal uh, way to look at accidents, injuries, and whatnot?
And
So, James,
understand accountability is not just at the worker level, it's all through your management system. I'm telling you I've made mistakes, believe it or not. Other people made mistakes. Intent has a lot to do with this, right? What was
yep,
the intention of the worker? So I just think we gotta evolve and get out of these camps in safety where everything is absolute. You know, I'm a super accountability, zero excuses, 100% accountability company, or I'm a no blame culture company. We never hold anybody accountable for anything because I tell you this, there is a regulatory body out there called OSHA and they will hold you accountable. And enforcement
absolutely.
activities have picked up. They have picked up. And used to when we had an incident, OSHA narrowly focused on the incident, and what I've seen is this becoming more of an expansion beyond the incident itself into a look into your entire safety management system for any type of violations that can be found, right? So don't know if
Agree.
that's good or bad, that's another episode. Just don't try not to be absolute. That's all I'm saying.
It
Roll
just
Tide.
depends. Roll Tide. Well, you know what? Don't take us out yet, Amanda. I just want to say thank you again to our listeners for checking us out on all our different avenues that they can check us out on, anywhere that you get podcasts, the Veriforce YouTube channel, soon to be our LinkedIn page. We're on Substack. We've been mentioned in Reddit, as James likes to say, we're everywhere, and we're here for you. So please come interact with us, come to our LinkedIn page or some of these places where you can make comments. Make the comments. Ask us to cover topics that we haven't covered yet that you want to hear about. And we are thankful to Veriforce who powers us every week.
Yep. Big shout out to our friends over at Veriforce for what they do to improve safety management systems. A lot of tools, a lot of system safety ideas, a lot of uh, really good people when it comes to advice and improving safety management systems, training programs, et cetera, in order to accomplish one goal, and that's to bring workers home safe from high hazard jobs. So I want to give a shout out to our friends over at Veriforce for what they do, empowering this podcast so our voices can get out there. Most of all, thank you to you cats that listen to us. Over 100 episodes, 2 years. Here we are in our new format, our new studio. Shout out to the amazing and lovely producer we have
Amanda.
now, Amanda. Thank you for what you do. And until next time, y'all keep bringing those workers home safe. Roll Tide, baby. It's
Wow.
football season. Out.